Thank you so much, Chairman Green, for always being so incredibly thoughtful in bringing, especially many of my neighbors who are talking about this issue, to Washington, to Congress, so that we can remain connected to, again, the struggles and challenges of our families. I represent the third poorest congressional district in the country. So this is something that I think is at the forefront of some of the struggles. I mean, it is not free to bank in our country. So I have the Federal Reserve has found that 6% of the U.S. Adults are unbanked and another 16% are underbanked. I know out of four in Detroit, an 85% Black city, don't have access to a savings account or a checking account. Many of these are, unbanked or underbanked individuals are experiencing economic distress. They're living check by check. Their lack of access to banking compounds the difficulties they have in accessing housing, credit, and other essential services. So we need to understand there aren't structures in place right now, I think, to support working class individuals, again, majority being my neighbors, in that regard. And I understand the struggle of trying to figure out what we're doing here. I think just talking about this issue and figuring out how do we fix it, because as a result, even though the pandemic has accelerated the trend towards digital payments, cash remains the primary payment method for 35 million Americans, and that's 14% of our population. We know that it is expensive to be poor in our country. Even as financial institutions offer so-called low-cost bank accounts, so-called like free checking, it is rarely free, y'all, particularly for low-income families and individuals who may struggle to maintain a balance. Banks recoup that cost of maintaining an account through other fees like overdraft penalties and so much more. So, Ms. Ruja, how does the shift to cashless economy compound the effects of penalties like overdraft fees? And do you think we have adequate overdraft protections in place for many of our neighbors, again, low-income neighbors that are experiencing this?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think that a cashless, certainly in the case of cashless retail, where people are required to have some kind of credit or consumer credit card, definitely widens the field for the kinds of abuses that you're talking about, the kind of, hidden fees, overdraft charges. In many cases, we have a coaching program and we have a counseling program, housing counseling program, and people are struggling to manage their budgets and make sure that they are not doing things to make their credit worse. So, to force people to move into situations where they're in danger of going into overdraft more often, and by subjecting them to the kind of cybersecurity problems, identity theft, would exacerbate the problem. And
Yeah,
I
no,
think,
and Ruja, I can tell you, I mean, it could be the littlest things, one day, not being able to get your child to school and having to spend a little bit more on gas or having a flat tire. I mean, so many various emergencies can really impact a family, just automatically set them back even 2 months. I know, Ms. Garcia, what role can creation of a public banking infrastructure can play here, such as postal banking? I know you talked about that, offering debit credits, debit cards automatically tied to individual Fed accounts, play in mitigating the effects of cashless economy and bridging that gap between the banked and the underbanked.
Yes, well, you definitely cited a very important element of one of the benefits of public banks, certainly greater accessibility and creation of banks that are using community input into what the community really needs. That's really important. We need to make sure that whatever structures we create, that those structures are created with community input. And another concept of public banking is that there's an understanding that exclusion is not economically efficient, right? That's a really important underlying precept around public bank, the creation of a public bank for the people. Access is so important, and I think there are so many neighborhoods that have been cut out of banking in part because banks just are not there, or they have left.
No, absolutely. I agree. I'm also really concerned, and Mr. Chair, I think I'm very concerned about that shift towards a cashless economy is placing more power and more data in the hands of unaccountable technology companies. For example, Google now has access to 70% of the nation's credit and and debit card transactions via data sharing agreements. Very scary, y'all. In 2019, Amazon integrated with WorldPay, a company that had already processed more than 1.7 trillion in payments annually. These are companies then that sell the biometric payment data that have collected to, other third parties with little to no regulation. And as corporations leverage their market power to keep consumers within their ecosystem, consumers
The
deserve public
gentle lady's
alternative to big.
time
Oh,
has expired by
thank you,
30
Mr.
seconds.
Chair. I'm so sorry.